Care of the Soul, A Guide for Cultivating Depth and Sacredness in Everyday Life by Thomas More. Introduction. The great malady of the 20th century, implicated in all our troubles and affecting us individually and socially, is loss of soul. When soul is neglected, it doesn't just go away. It appears symptomatically in obsessions, addictions, violence, and loss of meaning. Our temptation is to isolate these symptoms or to try to eradicate them one by one. But the root problem is that we have lost our wisdom about the soul, even our interest in it. We have today few specialists of the soul to advise us when we succumb to moods and emotional pain, or when as a nation we find ourselves confronting a host of threatening evils. But within our history, we do have remarkable sources of insight from people who wrote explicitly about the nature and needs of the soul. And so we can look to the past for guidance in restoring this wisdom. In this book, I will draw on the past wisdom, taking into account how we live now, to show that by caring for the soul, we can find relief from our distress and discover deep satisfaction and pleasure. It is impossible to define precisely what the soul is. Definition is an intellectual enterprise anyway. The soul prefers to imagine. We know intuitively that soul has to do with genuineness and depth, as when we say certain music has soul or a remarkable person is soulful. When you look closely at the image of soulfulness, you see that it is tied to life in all its particulars: good food, satisfying conversation, genuine friends, and experiences that stay in the memory and touch the heart. Soul is revealed in attachment, love, and community, as well as in retreat on behalf of inner communing and intimacy. Modern physiologists and therapists often contain an unspoken but clear salvational tone. If you could only learn to be assertive, loving, angry, expressive, contemplative, or thin, they imply your troubles would be over. The self-help book of the Middle Ages and Renaissance, which in some fashion I'm taking as a model, was cherished and revered, but was never great art and didn't promise the sky. It gave recipes for good living and offered suggestions for a practical, down-to-earth philosophy of life. I'm interested in this humbler approach, one that is more accepting of human foibles and indeed sees dignity and peace as emerging more from that acceptance than from any method of transcending the human condition. Therefore, this book, my own imagination of what a self-help manual could be, is a guide offering a philosophy of soulful living and techniques for dealing with everyday problems without striving for perfection or salvation. During the 15 years I have been practicing psychotherapy, I have been surprised how much my studies in Renaissance psychology, philosophy, and medicine have contributed to the work. That influence will be evident in this book as I follow the Renaissance penchant for turning to mythology for insight and cite authors of that time, such as Marsilio Ficino and Paracelsus. These were practical lovers of wisdom, who saw patients regularly, applying their highly imaginistic philosophies to the most ordinary matters. I have also taken the Renaissance approach of not separating psychology from religion. Jung, one of our most recent doctors of the soul, said that every physiological problem is ultimately a matter of religion. Thus, this book contains both physiological advice and spiritual guidance. A spiritual life of some kind is absolutely necessary for physiological health. At the same time, excessive or ungrounded spirituality can also be dangerous, leading to all kinds of compulsive and even violent behavior. Therefore, I include a section on the interplay of spirituality and soul. In his studies of alchemy, Jung says that the work begins and ends with Mercury. I think his recommendation applies to this book as well. Mercury is the god of fictions and fabrications, of trickery, thievery, and sleight of hand. The self-help idea lends itself to excessive sincerity. I often tell my clients that they should not strive for sincerity so earnestly. A dose of mercury is necessary to keep our works honest. Therefore, to some extent, I see this book also as a fiction of self-help. No one can tell you how to live your life. No one knows the secrets of the heart sufficiently to tell others about them authoritatively. All of this leads to the heart of the book, Care of the Soul. Tradition teaches that soul lies midway between understanding and unconsciousness, and that its instrument is neither the mind nor the body, but imagination. I understand therapy as nothing more than bringing imagination to areas that are devoid of it, which then must express themselves by becoming symptomatic. Fulfilling work, rewarding relationships, personal power, and relief from symptoms are all gifts of the soul. They are particularly elusive in our time because we don't believe in the soul and therefore give it no place in our hierarchy of values. We have come to know soul only in its complaints, when it stirs, disturbed by neglect and abuse, and causes us to feel its pain. It is commonplace for writers to point out that we live in a time of deep division, in which mind is separated from body and spirituality is at odds with materialism. But how do we get out of this split? We can't just think ourselves through it, because thinking itself is a part of the problem. What we need is a way out of dualistic attitudes. We need a third possibility, and that third is soul. In the 15th century, Marsilio Ficino put it as simply as possible. The mind, he said, tends to go off on its own so that it seems to have no relevance to the physical world. At the same time, the materialistic life can be so absorbing that we get caught up in it and forget about spirituality. What we need, he said, is soul, in the middle, holding together mind and body, ideas and life, spirituality, and the world. What I am going to present in this book, then, is a program for bringing soul back into life. This is not a new idea. I am simply developing a very old idea in a way I hope will be intelligible and applicable to us in this particular crucial period in history. The idea of a soul-centered world goes back to the earliest days of our culture. It has been sketched out in every period of our history in the writings of Plato, in the experiments of Renaissance theologians, in the letters and literature of the Romantic poets, and finally, in Freud, who gave us a glimpse of a psychic underworld full of memory, fantasy, and emotion. Jung made explicit what was embryonic in Freud, speaking forthrightly for soul and reminding us that we have much to learn about it from our forebears. A new approach to psychology that is mindful of this history and explicitly follows Ficino's advice to put soul at the very center of our lives. This book will focus not just on the idea of soul, but on concrete ways we can foster soulfulness in our ordinary everyday lives. To describe this process, I have borrowed a key phrase from Christianity. For hundreds of years, the parish priest received into his charge the souls of those who lived within the boundaries of his church. This responsibility, as well as the work he did tending the needs of the people, was known as cura animarum, the cure of souls. Cure means charge, as well as care. If we take up this image and apply it to ourselves, we can imagine the responsibility we each have to our own soul. Just as the parish priest was available at life's crucial moments, not as a doctor or a healer, but simply to accompany and tend the soul in times of birth, illness, marriage, crisis, and death, we can respond to our own soul as it winds its way through the maze of our life's unfolding. The role of the curate, as he was called, was to provide a religious context for the larger turning points in life, and also to maintain the affectional ties of family, marriage, and community. We can be the curates or curators of our own souls, an idea that implies an inner priesthood and personal religion. To undertake this restoration of soul means we have to make spirituality a more serious part of everyday life. You can see already that care of the soul is quite different in scope from most modern notions of physiology and psychotherapy. It isn't about curing, fixing, changing, adjusting, or making healthy, and it isn't about some idea of perfection or even improvement. It doesn't look to the future for an ideal, trouble-free existence. Rather, it remains patiently in the present, close to life as it presents itself day by day, and yet at the same time mindful of religion and spirituality. Here is another major difference between care of the soul and psychotherapy in the usual sense. Psychology is a secular science, while care of the soul is a sacred art. Although I am borrowing the terminology of Christianity, what I am proposing is not specifically Christian, nor is it tied to any particular religious tradition. It does, however, imply a religious sensibility and a recognition of our absolute need for a spiritual life. In the modern world, we separate religion and psychology, spiritual practice, and therapy. There is considerable interest in healing this split, but if it is going to be bridged, our very idea of what we are doing in our psychology has to be radically reimagined. Psychology and spirituality need to be seen as one. In my view, this new paradigm suggests the end of psychology as we know it altogether because it is essentially modern, secular, and ego-centered. A new idea, a new language, and new traditions must be developed on which to base our theory and practice. Our Renaissance and Romantic ancestors, as well as Freud, Jung, and Hillman and their colleagues, all turned to the past for a renewal of their imaginations. We are in grave need of just a Renaissance of our own, a rebirth of ancient wisdom and practice accommodated to our own situation. The great Renaissance thinkers made continuous efforts to reconcile medicine and magic, religion and philosophy, everyday life and meditation, ancient wisdom, and the most recent discoveries and inventions. We are dealing with the same issues, except that we are further in time from the days of magic and mythology, and for us, technology has become a burden as well as an enormous achievement. The emotional complaints of our time, complaints we therapists hear every day in our practice, include emptiness, meaninglessness, vague depression, disillusionment about marriage, family, and relationship, a loss of values, yearning for personal fulfillment, a hunger for spirituality. All of these symptoms reflect a loss of soul and let us know what the soul craves. We yearn excessively for entertainment, power, intimacy, sexual fulfillment, and material things, and we think we can find these things if we discover the right relationship or job, the right church or therapy. But without soul, whatever we find will be unsatisfying, for what we truly long for is the soul in each of these areas. Lacking that soulfulness, we attempt to gather these alluring satisfactions to us in great masses, thinking apparently that quantity will make up for lack of quality. Care of the soul speaks to the longings we feel and to the symptoms that drive us crazy, but it is not a path away from shadow or death. A soulful personality is complicated, multifaceted, and shaped by both pain and pleasure, success and failure. Life lived soulfully is not without its moments of darkness and periods of foolishness. Dropping the salvational fantasy frees us up to the possibility of self-knowledge and self-acceptance, which are the very foundation of soul.